Yes, it was. There, video over. I have not been hearing good things about the film Morbius, and I wondered if this hatred of this obscure Marvel character was justified, or if the film really isn't all that bad. So I rented it and learned that, wow, they were all completely right to bash and hate this film. It immediately makes the mistake of having an obscure comic book character film open up with them in Costa Rica, with absolutely no context as to what they're doing here or why or who this person even is. As soon as they land, the pilot guy says, "Need a doctor?" to Morbius, as if that wasn't obvious to us by the way he looks. And he's looking to capture some bat with what has to be the dumbest trap I've ever seen. There are clearly spaces in between the lines here, and well, the bats can just go around it too. I mean, Morbius literally says the vampire bats he's after can down large prey with ease, and there are like tens of thousands of them in there. Yet he just cuts his hand, holds it out, and attracts them all out, putting everyone at risk. I mean, a quick Google search tells me that bat catching professionals exist, and that he could have, I don't know, hired one of these guys, or Morbius could have just logged onto Amazon, typed bat traps, and there are some cheap options there to just place around the cave entrance. And hey, he could have always gone to a hospital or something and paid them to perform like a venipuncture if he really wanted to use his own blood as bait here. This is the equivalent of cutting your legs and jumping into the Amazon River just to attract some piranhas to catch with a handheld fishing net. So he instantly gets swarmed, of course, and somehow not munched on by the bats. Then we cut back to 25 years earlier in Greece to learn just who this man is and what drove him to this insane idea. He's playing chess alone at some kind of care center for people ill like him, and it makes sense as to why he's alone, as a new arrival, Lucan, he immediately calls Milo. In fact, he seems to call everyone who gets placed in the bed besides him as Milo, as he explains, and goes on to say that there is no cure for what they have, and only a constant blood change can keep them alive. Then Lucan's machine breaks down, and for some reason there's no nurse around to help. These guys can apparently drop down near dead if their machines changing their blood fails, even for 1 second. There should be someone watching them at all times, but there just isn't. So Morbius has to change a fuse with a pen spring? I really don't think that should have worked. And the doctor is impressed by the fact that he was able to replace a fuse with a spring, and says he should go to a gifted school and he will convince the people there to pay for his tuition simply because Morbius fixed a blood changing machine's fuse with a spring. So that means he could be a doctor as opposed to, say, an engineer, you know, because he fixed a mechanical failure. And Morbius decides to take the offer and leaves a note for Lucan, who he still calls Milo, explaining he's going to find a cure for them. So apparently Morbius cares for someone he literally just met. They couldn't have just make Lucan some old-time friend instead of a person he doesn't know, nor bothers to just use the real name of. That would have made a lot more sense and have been narratively satisfying as a selfless motivation explaining his irrational decision at the beginning of the film, but no, we never get any bonding moment between these two. Morbius just asks the doctor there, "What about Milo?" And the doctor replies, "I'll look after Milo. The kid's name is not Milo." This bugs me, because Morbius apparently called everyone who's been placed in the bed besides him as Milo. So it's not some special title episode on Lucan. And then the letter Lucan has flies out of the window just to be picked up by some bullies who taunt and then beat him up after he hits one of them trying to get it back, and then the doctor has to save him. There really isn't any point to this scene. I don't see why they felt it was important enough to include here. Then we immediately cut to Morbius an unspecified time later in Sweden, with the same doctor praising him for completing his doctorate at 19, becoming an expert in all blood-borne diseases, and inventing artificial blood. and he was supposed to get a reward from the King of Sweden there. And then it immediately cuts to New York, where he's caring for some kid, Anna, where they talk about how he dissed the King of Sweden and the entire scientific community by not accepting the Nobel Peace Prize because he thought his experiment was a failure. The doc at the presentation said that artificial blood has saved more lives than penicillin, you know, the first antibiotic ever invented. Yet Morbius' only response here is, "You know I have problems." We don't see this Anna character much, or much interactions beyond this moment, and yet Morbius speaks to her as if she too is some kind of old-time friend. Then immediately his assistant Bancroft pulls him away to ask if their generous funder Milo, again, not his name, knows that the guy is trying to mix bat and human DNA to cure their illness. And the bats he brought from Costa Rica are here. Just how he caught so many with that lackluster trap while being surrounded by them as the bait is never explained. He does explain he picked vampire bats because in order to drink blood, they have a unique anticoagulants or blood thinners to feed on other species' blood. So apparently the bloodborne disease he has is something that causes excessive clotting, maybe? And aspirin or other synthetic coagulants that exist can't thin it out. So he wants to mix human DNA with vampire bats' DNA to get his body to produce the stuff automatically and perhaps make a cure through that. Again, there are synthetic anticoagulants. Why don't those work? Why doesn't he try to make a stronger version of those? It sounds to me, from the way he rejected the Nobel Prize for a quote-unquote failed experiment, that Morbius made the artificial blood as an attempt to cure his illness. I am no doctor, but I'm pretty sure making artificial blood is just the same as using normal blood for transfusion. Bones make blood, and we continue to do so with the tainted stuff regardless of what he puts in place of it. I need an explanation here as to why he doesn't just make stronger or cheaper synthetic anticoagulants as medication. Surely that's a better first step than splicing DNA from an animal to humans here. Morbius tries to justify his actions in the most flimsy way possible by saying that bacteria has been splicing itself with human DNA over thousands of years, as if that's in any way similar to making a chimera between a human and a bat, and goes on to say that if people don't push at the boundaries of science, then there can be no change. So yeah, we got someone who doesn't realize that there's a legitimate reason as to why people draw lines not to be crossed. The writers attempt to make him sympathetic by giving him people he's allegedly trying to help falls flat, because we're not really shown that he knows any of these people. And he didn't accept the Nobel Prize for making artificial blood because it didn't do exactly what he wanted, even if it undoubtedly saved like millions of lives. And just because Morbius says that it's his destiny to save, quote-unquote, his best friend Milo, doesn't make that true if you don't take the time to show their relationship and his care for someone else with the same disease. They barely do that in this film, and it's just with Anna, really, and briefly at that, whom he needs to put into a coma after her condition worsens. And that's your lot. Why they couldn't just make this Anna scene with Lucan to create this sense of urgency and brotherhood, I don't understand. So he injects a mouse with bat DNA, and then it dies. But no, wait, never mind. It's actually perfectly fine, so his Chimera experiment worked. So now all we need to do is convince Roanoke Gaming to watch this film, so we can get some kind of explanation as to the science behind any of this. Because the film sure as hell doesn't even try to make that attempt. So Morbius needs to meet with his chief financial backer, Lucan, because that's his name, to tell of his success. I would also like to point out that Lucan is said to be living the high life here, and clearly is trying to enjoy the time he has and be happy. Yet he immediately tried to dissuade Morbius from ever trying to fall in love with Bancroft because, quote-unquote, love is not on the cards for us. It seems disingenuous from Lucan, who knows he's liable to die at any time, yet looks to be accepting of that fact and is trying to enjoy life the best he can, juxtaposing Morbius, who has been working all his life to cure them and has not been having much fun. I mean, just look at the way they dress. I thought they were going to go with this staying where to Lucan, a cure is not really that important, yet helping him is the chief motivation of Morbius, even though Lucan says the two of them haven't met in years, yet still act like old friends, even though we've never seen much evidence of that. And Lucan is completely on board with the experiment, even though it had only one successful mouse trial, and the mouse died before coming back to life. And then they have to head out to international waters to do it. It doesn't seem like either of them are suffering, and even Lucan feels like someone who should have been encouraging Mobius to relax and maybe enjoy something in his short life, but no, there's no talk like that. I think that would have been a far more interesting dynamic between them, but no. Instead, we just have two dying guys who we've barely seen spend time together, the latter being convinced to fund Morbius's highly experimental DNA splicing experiment just because it might work, and yeah, that about summarizes things. That's the main issue of the film. We only get brief glimpses that the characters are actual people and not just guys existing to move the plot forwards. You don't ever want any character you write to feel like that, because then they just come across as confusing and even boring to watch with how they fluctuate with their emotions to fit a scene, and they have a lacking or weak motive for what they do. And we are just 1/4 of the way through the film, mind you. And Lucan is just this confusing mess of visual and vocal contradictions, and it does not get better as the film progresses. So Morbius gets the serum to work, and Bancroft injects it into his back, then he turns into a bat-human hybrid, and then kills all of the mercenaries he hired to protect the boat he was on, partially because he is a vampire now, and I think because one of the mercs pushed Bancroft into a machine and knocked her out. I'm not sure about that last part. He spares the shortest glance towards her, like 2 times, then just goes on a rampage killing everyone. This event is pretty abrupt. Like, one moment he's strapped into a medical chair after the injection, the next he's just off it and then hanging from the ceiling in the room, then attacks the mercs. Also, why did he hire all these armed mercenaries? I know Mobius said this experiment is illegal, hence why they're out on a boat in international waters, but why are there armed mercs with them? Why are there mercenaries here, if not just because the directors wanted to hurry things along and make him a vampire and start the action? Hence the slow motion and predator framing attacks by Morbius. And there are a bunch of armed mercenaries on this boat. Like, pretty much everyone has a gun, and we literally see no other crew aboard the ship besides the mercs, and spreads themselves out throughout the ship to be picked off, even though they know Morbius was in the lab and should just converge there to kill him. It's a fairly contrived action scene, and soon enough he regains himself, and for some reason he can shift from a vampire bat to a human? I don't know. And learns from the security footage what he did, and in horror takes the remaining serum, wipes the security footage, calls in a mayday, then jumps overboard to presumably swim back to land? I mean, I don't know how he gets back to land. He literally jumps off the ship. All he does for Bancroft is check her heart rate, then covers her with a blanket before leaving. Like, he does nothing else to make sure she's alright. The FBI shows up with the Coast Guard and finds the bodies drained of blood and realize there's gotta be a vampire-like creature on the loose. I mean, that is a fair assumption to make. Like, they find bodies literally drained of blood with bite marks on their necks. Mobius makes it back to land from the ocean somehow and visits Bancroft in the hospital, and I don't understand why she has a breathing tube. She was lightly shoved, then hit her head on some machinery. Actually, I don't think she even hit her head. I think she just bumped into it with her body, and it didn't look that bad. Why are they showing her as if she's in critical condition? And for some reason, Morbius apologizes, even though he watched the security footage. He should have known it was a merc that pushed her and not him. Like I said, he does not feel like a person, but just someone that exists to push the plot along. Mobius heads back to his main lab and talks about how he's lost his debilitating disease now, but has this strong desire to consume human blood, which shouldn't be an issue at all, because he eats the blue synthetic blood he invented and it works perfectly fine. Synthetic blood can be produced indefinitely and it doesn't have to come from actual humans, so this desire to feed on blood shouldn't really be an issue in the film. He looks perfectly human too, although sharp claws and teeth can disappear at will, it seems. Really, there isn't a problem that isn't easily fixable here. Just feed on the synthetic blood. He's got great strength, agility, echolocation, and the vampire bats seem to like him too. And he has a great way of controlling the urge without harming any human beings. So it's at this point you wonder, what's the problem here? We are 40 minutes into the film. That's 1/3 of the way through it all. What could be the main conflict here now? Well, Lucan comes along and sees Morbius strong and seemingly cured, and suddenly he's desperate to be cured? That's not really the impression he was giving off in the modern day scenes we've seen him in, and of course Morbius shoves that off because this is not a cure, and forces Lucien to leave. Then Morbius goes wild in the middle of the night and kills a nurse in the hospital in the most cliched horror movie moment. Like, there's lights flickering all the time. She ends up just seeing him briefly and then lights flicker off. He's gone. Ooh. I guess they don't have working cameras in the hospital to figure out what happened. But why did Morbius go feral? When he ate the synthetic blood, he was fine. Why did that suddenly change? Because plot, that's why. It's the same reason why when he leaves the lab to see the nurse's body, nobody questions nor notes why the renowned and well-known doctor that works here is not the skinny man in crutches no more. Nor why when Morbius leaves, he takes a lot of the synthetic blood, but he forgets both of the vials of the vampire serum. No, really, he just leaves it there for Lucan to just take it and use it on himself. And that's the second major problem with this film. In all fictional stories, everything within happens to move the plot along, but the key as a writer is to not make that obvious to the audience. To not make the fact that you are contriving these scenes into happening clear to them, and Morbius fails at that. So the FBI guys looking into the boat incident immediately shows up to confront Morbius as he's leaving the hospital and arrest him, mostly because he killed the nurse Christine. And Lucan visits him in prison and swears to get him out while leaving Morbius a blood bag. And this is the moment that makes me feel like I'm watching two old-time friends coming together as Lucan tries to say that those were just mercs, armed thugs, and it's not his fault for going feral. Then, Lucan leaves his cane in the cell, and there was this cool scene where they slowly reveal Lucan took the serum that Morbius left behind, and is a vampire too, but they drag it out way too long, so it just comes across as dumb. Like, yeah, I get it, Lucan took the serum, move on please. So Morbius drinks the blood and vamps up to escape prison and chase after him. And Lucan just kills some guy manning a stand after he calls Morbius a freak, because we're at the halfway point of the film and we need a villain for Morbius to defeat. So let's make Lucan into a psychopath with a contrived reasoning, who just kills people like it's nothing? And oh my god, Lucan reveals that, oh, he was the one that killed the nurse. I'm sorry, when did he take the serum? Morbius clearly has 2 left on his desk when he tried to flee the building after the killing. Did Lucan find a way to make his own? It's never explained how in the world he could have gotten that beforehand to kill that nurse. The two have this argument where Lucan is like, I looked up to you as a brother, and Morbius is like, oh, this isn't you. And it's so cliche and dumb because, again, we don't really know these people, if you really want to call them that. They're more just like plot devices to move things along. So I'm not at all invested in this conversation they're having, and Lucan runs away and a fight and chase happens. And then after a bunch of cops get killed and whatnot, Morbius just flees and asks Bancroft to help supply him with stuff, but he ends up needing to just take over a counterfeit money operation by some gangsters and make a stupid Venom reference to scare them off. Like seriously, this whole thing apparently takes place in the Venom universe, because that's separate from the other stuff. Yeah. The remainder of the film is basically just Lucan killing people and Morbius trying to make a new serum to kill himself and Lucan. Bancroft gets killed by Liu Kang, which did surprise me. I assumed she was going to be kidnapped and used to lure Morbius into a trap, but no, Liu Kang just kills her and Morbius loses control and feeds on her corpse. Then he and Liu Kang have admittedly what is a pretty cool looking fight scene, and then Morpheus summons a horde of bats somehow to help him pin down Liu Kang and inject him with the serum to kill him. The film ends with Morbius flying away with this horde of bats, and Bancroft, oh my god, is revealed to be alive and a vampire too. And it doesn't end there because, you know, Marvel films all of a post-credit scene, and oh my god, it's the main villain from Spider-Man Homecoming being teleported into a cell, because remember in Spider-Man No Way Home there was that whole like multiverse split thing where some people were getting pulled in. Well, apparently Vulture got teleported here into a prison cell, and a news reporter says that a hearing is taking place after this bizarre transfer to have him released effective immediately. Yeah. So that was Morbius. I have watched it and can confirm it really is as bad as people say. I don't recommend you watch it unless you, I don't know, are really curious even after everything I've showed you. It's a lackluster story, terribly contrived motivations and scenes, and just terrible writing overall that makes the Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes scores well deserved for this film. If you like this video and want to see more of my work, then click that like button and check out my channel for my other video essays, music analysis videos, overanalyzing She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, and complex character series. If you actually liked watching Morbius, then I'm genuinely curious to hear why, so comment your thoughts down below, or just anything about the film in general. I would like to hear everyone else's thoughts and feelings on this.